A couple winters ago, my HOA sent me a letter so ridiculous I laughed in my kitchen. They said they were revoking my mountain access easement, revoking it like it was a gym membership and they'd decided I no longer qualified. That would have been funny enough except for one small problem. The only winter road their whole tourism business depended on crossed a strip of land I owned outright, and across that strip sat a steel gate, my gate. So after being told in writing that my property rights had somehow been canceled by people with a logo and too much confidence, I closed the gate, locked it, hung a sign on it, and went home. My cabin sits high on a ridge above a development called Pine Hollow Ridge. Nice name, nice image. But I bought my land years before that subdivision existed. Back then there was no HOA, no rental market, just timber rock and an old logging road winding up the mountain. That road crossed several parcels, including the lower lots where the neighborhood was later built. When I bought my place, my deed included a recorded perpetual easement on that exact road. Permanent access, tied to the land itself, not tied to permission and definitely not tied to a board vote from people who came later. For years, nobody questioned it. Everything was normal. Then the board changed. Somebody figured out the mountain behind the neighborhood connected to a big snowmobile trail network. After that, the development stopped behaving like a neighborhood and started behaving like a business. Investors bought cabins. Owners turned them into short-term rentals. Soon, every weekend brought trucks towing snowmobiles up the hill. At first, I ignored it. But heavy trailers chewed up the gravel. Ruts got deeper. The drainage ditch started failing because nobody maintained it. By late winter, the road looked torn up. So I emailed the HOA board. I sent photos of the washouts, the ruts, the ditch collapse. I reminded them the easement had a shared maintenance clause. Anybody benefiting from the road was supposed to help maintain it. I said we needed repairs before spring thaw turned the whole thing into mud. A week later, a certified letter showed up. Not about repairs, not about maintenance. The letter said my access rights were now subject to updated community covenants and that continued use of the road required approval from the association board. I stood there reading it 3 times, thinking maybe I was missing something obvious. I wasn't. The HOA didn't exist when that easement was recorded. Their rules came later. But somehow they had convinced themselves they could control a property right that already existed. I wrote back politely. I attached my deed, the recorded plat map, and explained that the easement was permanent and attached to my land. I figured that would settle it. It didn't. Another letter came a week later. Same letterhead, same signatures, only worse. This one said my easement was revoked pending compliance review. Revoked. I laughed again, but it had that sharp edge to it now. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I know this much: recorded easements don't disappear because an HOA board gets ambitious on a Tuesday night. And here's the detail they clearly forgot. About a quarter-mile down that road, right where the climb up the ridge begins, there's a short stretch of land that belongs entirely to me. Not shared. Not common area. Mine. Years earlier, during wildfire season, I'd put in a reinforced steel gate there to control access if conditions got bad. I always left it open because there had never been a reason not to. Until then, that evening I drove down in the cold brush snow off the chain, swung the gate shut, locked it, and hung a sign that said private property access restricted according to recorded easement terms. Then I went home and waited. The next morning, the first rental guests came up towing snowmobiles. They rounded the bend and found a locked steel gate blocking the only road Pine Hollow Ridge had been advertising all winter. They sat there a second, backed up, then turned around and went back down. By day 2, the panic had started. Guests were calling property managers angry because they'd booked cabins for trail access and couldn't get to the trail system. Refund requests started rolling in. Bad reviews followed. Then the owners got mad, and when owners start losing money, they get loud. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. Richard Collier, HOA president. He said, "We've received reports that you locked the access gate." I told him yes, I had. Then he said, "That road serves the entire community. You can't just block it." And that was perfect because a week earlier they had sent me a letter claiming my easement was revoked. Now suddenly the road belonged to everyone again. Funny how that works when bookings start collapsing. I reminded him about the letter. He went quiet. Then he said they needed the gate open for winter operations. That told me everything. This wasn't about neighborhood harmony. It was about money. Their business model was bottlenecked by land they didn't control. I told him something simple. If the HOA truly believed my easement had been revoked, then the only person with a clear right to go through my gate was me. More silence. Then he muttered something about reviewing the matter and got off the phone. Over the next few days, the pressure came from everywhere. Property managers called, rental hosts left voicemails. One owner even drove up to my cabin and tried to talk me into opening the gate just for the weekend. But this wasn't about one weekend. The board had made a contradiction in writing. According to them, my access rights were suspended. According to the county records, they were not. Once they did that, the smartest thing I could do was hold the line. A woman named Denise Harper called me one evening. She owned one of the nicer rental cabins in the development. She told me the board had been selling owners on the idea that Pine Hollow Ridge controlled mountain access. But after the gate closed, Denise went digging through old documents. She found the same plat references I'd already sent the board. Then she said they knew enough to ask the question. They just didn't want the answer. That changed the whole thing. Up to that point, it was me against the board. After Denise started talking to other owners, it became the board against its own people. Owners were furious that refunds were piling up because the board had tried to bluff its way around a recorded property right instead of reading the documents first. A week after I locked the gate, another certified envelope arrived. This time it came from the HOA's attorney. Different tone entirely. No more talk about revoking anything. Now they were requesting cooperation while the easement issue was discussed. I sent the letter straight to my lawyer. My attorney reviewed the deed, the plat map, the letters, and the maintenance clause. Then he sent back a response that was short and clean. The association had to formally rescind the revocation notice, acknowledge in writing that the easement was permanent and attached to my property, and enter into a cost-sharing maintenance agreement. Until then, the gate stayed closed. After that, things got very quiet, not peaceful. Just quiet in the way people get when they realize they're losing. Guests kept showing up. Cancellations kept stacking up. Owners kept leaning on the board. About 3 weeks into the standoff, Richard called again. His voice sounded tired now. He asked if we could meet in person. We met down by the gate. Snow piled along the road, old trailer tracks frozen in the slush. Richard said this situation is hurting the community. I told him the community didn't create the problem. The board did. Then their attorney stepped in. He said the board was prepared to withdraw the revocation notice and acknowledge the easement as recorded. In return, they wanted assurance that the road would stay open for trail access. I told them access had never been the real issue. Maintenance was. Respect for recorded rights was. The easement had worked for years. They were the ones who turned it into a fight because they assumed I'd back down. We stood there in the cold and went back and forth for half an hour. No yelling, just that stiff kind of conversation where everybody knows exactly how expensive their mistake has become. In the end, they agreed to shared costs, drainage work, regular grading, scheduled repairs, better oversight during heavy winter traffic. 2 weeks later, the paperwork arrived. Official rescission of the revocation, written acknowledgement of the easement, signed maintenance agreement, properly filed. So I drove down there one more morning, snow coming down soft. Barely a sound except my boots on the ice. I brushed frost off the hinge, unlocked the chain, and pushed the gate open. It swung wide the same way it always had. Within hours, trailers were climbing the ridge again. Snowmobiles buzzing past. Tourism resumed. But something had changed. The board had learned the hard way that governing a neighborhood is not the same thing as owning the land under it. And I learned something too. A lot of authority in this world is just confidence wearing a badge. It works until somebody reads the documents and says no. Once the fight was over, the road actually got better. The ditch got repaired. Fresh gravel went down before spring thaw. Traffic got managed more carefully on busy weekends. The solution had been sitting there from the beginning, written in the easement the whole time. Shared use meant shared responsibility. But money has a way of making people forget what's theirs and what isn't. So no, I don't regret locking that gate. Sometimes the only way people understand the limits of their power is when reality shuts in front of them with a steel latch. And the scene that still makes me smile wasn't the meeting or the letters or Richard standing there looking sick. It was the first Saturday after everything got recorded. I stood up on the ridge with a hot mug in my hand, watching trailers roll slowly up that repaired road in the blue cold morning, one after another, over a road the HOA was finally helping pay to maintain because a locked gate had reminded them where authority ends. That felt like karma done properly. So tell me this, if an HOA board tried to bully you off a recorded property, right, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have closed the gate and forced the issue or opened it early to keep the peace? And where do you think the line is between defending what's yours and making sure the people who crossed it never forget the lesson? I'd really like to hear what you think.